Hello and welcome to this video overview in which I, Don Lukas, discuss some of the most important concepts from Chapter 2, The Writing Process, in my textbook, College Composition and Reading, Information and Strategies. In this video, we'll be going over Part 1, which looks at a writing process overview and examines the first few steps of an effective writing process, understanding the assignment and the rhetorical situation. The first thing that I want to mention about the writing process is that there's not necessarily one correct writing process. There are many different ways that effective writing can be accomplished, and since everyone's different, some methods will be more useful for some people, while others are more useful for others. You should try to discover the sequence of steps that will be most effective for you personally. There are two main approaches to the writing process. One emphasizes a lot of planning, including things such as free writing, brainstorming, outlining, and so forth, before the first draft is done. This method means that less time will have to be spent on revision, since the ideas and organization were already honed in the pre-writing stage, and there will be much less revision needed. This is the method that many instructors, myself included, tend to emphasize and find the most useful. However, it is not the only way. The other method jumps more directly into the drafting process and requires additional time spent on revision to get to that same level of quality. Keep in mind that the time spent on revision and planning do not have a one-to-one correspondence. For instance, if you spend an hour on planning, that's roughly equivalent to 2 hours or more of revision. After all, it's faster and simpler to add, subtract, or rearrange ideas while they're in list format than it is once they've been fully written out. If your ideas are already in a logical order and all connected to each other, less revision will be needed. On the other hand, as I stated before, everyone is different, and if it works best for you to do some thinking in your head and then jump directly into what might be termed an idea draft, which you then use as the basis for your revisions and ideas, structure, and organization, that is a method that can certainly be effective and useful. Do take note of the fact that if you do less revision, it means you have to do more planning. An effective writing process must include an emphasis on one or the other. Hastily jotting down an extremely rough draft with little to no planning and then doing minimal or no revision is not an effective or useful way to produce a well-written essay or other piece of writing. The most efficient processes will include at least some of all three elements: pre-writing, drafting, and revision, although the balance may be tipped towards pre-writing or towards revision. A complete writing process for a challenging piece of writing, such as an essay, will usually consist of the following steps, although they might be accomplished in different ways, using different strategies, and some may even happen mostly inside your head rather than on paper, if you are the type for whom it's preferable to spend more time revising rather than doing formal planning. First, before you do any writing or any planning, you'll need to make sure that you understand the assignment and/or the rhetorical situation surrounding the writing occasion. If you're writing for an assignment in school, it's vital to understand what the teacher is asking for. The more you can glean from the assignment itself, the more likely you are to earn a better grade by turning in what the teacher is asking for. Plus, the more guidance you get from the assignment, the less you have to figure out for yourself. On the other hand, if you're writing to accomplish some real-life purpose, you'll want to take time to consciously think about the aspects of the situation that you should take into account in order for your writing to be as successful as possible, such as who your audience is. In either case, narrowing your focus before you begin brainstorming and pre-writing will help you stay on track and accomplish what you're setting out to do more efficiently and effectively. This bullet is bold because this is the step that this video focuses on. All other steps will be covered in the next video. Once you have a good idea of what you're trying to accomplish and the other circumstances surrounding your writing, you're ready to begin generating ideas through brainstorming and/or gathering them through research. Since research is covered in detail in other chapters, we'll only be looking at brainstorming in the next video. After gathering or generating your ideas, you're ready to work with them, making sure that the ideas you have are focused on supporting your thesis or otherwise are effective in what you're trying to achieve. You can cut ideas or information that don't seem to help as much, narrowing your focus. Once you've decided which ideas you're going to use, you'll then organize them, grouping similar ideas and deciding in what order you're going to present what you have to say. Basically, in this step, you end up with an outline. The process of creating an outline might have shown you places where you want to get a little more information or places that need additional brainstorming or research for support. Finally, once you have your ideas and information in the order you want to present them, writing the actual rough draft itself should be a snap. And of course, that last part of a complete writing process for writing of any length will be editing and proofreading until it's ready. One final tip is to take breaks between the steps, which lets the ideas percolate and gives you a more accurate overview of your paper. Although it seems obvious, reading the assignment carefully is the first step towards doing well on a college assignment. Most teachers craft these carefully, adding to and revising them as they see what elements students have trouble with. So, read the directions carefully, and then check back on them any time that you're stuck, as well as after you've finished the first draft, and make sure you are doing what is asked. Once in college, I was given an assignment. I read through the directions. I kept thinking about how I was going to complete the assignment over the next couple of days, getting an idea, discarding it, and having another inspired by the first. Finally, I got a good idea that I thought would work well, and I wrote up the paper. Imagine my surprise when I got it back, and I got an F. My ideas had drifted to the point where the paper I wrote was related to the assignment, kind of, but didn't actually follow directions. Don't let this happen to you. And even if you don't make an obvious mistake like this one, the more information you can get from the assignment, the less you have to figure out for yourself, and the more likely you are to actually do what the teacher wants. Always the surest route to getting an A. I've included in your textbook an overview of the common parts of the assignment, but basically you should read all the parts carefully, getting as much information as possible from each. Underlining, highlighting, or taking notes can be helpful in getting the best understanding of the assignment and retaining the best memory of what it is you're supposed to do. Paying attention to key terms is also important. I included a list of key terms and what they mean in the textbook, not because I think you don't know what it means to define or summarize or compare, but because you may know these words so well that you tend to gloss over them. You might read them without really thinking about the implications of what the meaning has for what the teacher wants from you. Again, remember that the more direction and information you get from the assignment directions, the less you have to figure out for yourself. Even determining which of the three categories of words your teacher is using, information, relation, or interpretation, can help guide your efforts, letting you know whether to concentrate on reporting facts and showing your knowledge when the instructor asks for information, connecting things together and showing how they relate or contrast when the instructor asks about relationships, or arguing your own opinion or idea when interpretation is required. I also want to emphasize that you're almost never being asked solely to present information. By the time you make it into college, teachers are asking you to use information, not just gather it. I also highly encourage you to spend time thinking about how you can fulfill the assignment in a way that lets you discuss something that genuinely interests you, or at least in the way that you find the least boring to do. Remember, writing is easier and tends to turn out better if you care about the topic or what you have to say. It's easier to say a lot in an engaging way when you're interested or excited about what you're saying. It's true when we're speaking, and it's even truer when we're writing. Of course, if the teacher gives you information on how the assignment is going to be graded, you want to pay special attention to that. If the teacher gives a rubric, it describes exactly what features you should concentrate on to earn the highest possible grade. If they tell you how much each part is going to be worth, that's valuable information as well. If tables and charts will be worth 10 points, the introduction is worth 5, and your thesis is worth 20, and the title isn't even mentioned, clearly you shouldn't spend hours and hours agonizing over your introduction and coming up with a clever title. You should spend those hours agonizing over your thesis, perhaps with a sideline in making your graphics pretty. Of course, one of the biggest factors in earning an A from a particular teacher is what the teacher is like. Does the teacher want the class to repeat her lessons verbatim on tests, or does she encourage putting things in your own words? Does she encourage students to share opinions, or does she prefer to tell you what you should think? While I have my own personal opinion on which of these types of teachers is better, doing what the teacher wants tends to be the most reliable way to get a good grade. You can also think about what's usually required in the discipline. For example, English classes often ask for interpretation, whereas a science class might expect more of a research report. Finally, also avoid lame techniques to try and make the paper look better than it is. Spend your time mostly on content rather than appearance. Don't try and use tricks like bigger fonts or spacing to make the paper seem longer than it is, and don't wait until the night before. Believe me, teachers have seen it all before, and we are not fooled. When people hear the word rhetoric or rhetorical, the most common association is with a rhetorical question. This is a question that doesn't require an answer, such as asking, "Do you want me to be late?" The purpose of a rhetorical question is clearly not to get an answer, especially since the correct answer is often obvious. Rather, it's to have a certain effect or impact on the reader or listener. In my example a moment ago, the idea is to get the person to realize they are acting like they want you to be late, or they're causing you to be late, so that then they will stop hindering you. So then, a rhetorical question is one that is asked for effect. Similarly, rhetoric is the study or use of effective communication, having the desired effect on the reader or listener. Crafting effective writing means considering the elements or circumstances surrounding the writing that you're doing, which is called the rhetorical situation. One way to imagine this is through a rhetorical circle, which you can see here. We will discuss each aspect and how you can use an awareness of that aspect to help you make choices that will make your writing as effective as possible. In one way, rhetoric is simply being aware of the choices that you make in your writing and being conscious about making the best possible choices rather than proceeding on autopilot. As you can see from the illustration, there are several aspects. For example, the purpose and culture will underlie or influence most of your decisions, whereas the other areas are considered separately from each other. Let's take some time to look at each aspect in detail. First, there is the author. You want to consider yourself. What might you consider for this aspect? Let's take a look. First, it is easier to write, and your writing turns out better when you care about what you're saying. So one aspect of considering the author would be picking a topic or argument that you're knowledgeable about or interested in. Also, you want to consider your strengths. Are you great at making people laugh? Then you might want to consider incorporating humor. Do you have a hard time staying on topic? Then you'll want to make sure to pay attention to doing so. Similarly, you want to avoid your weaknesses, things that you know you don't do well or have a hard time understanding. So then, one aspect of the rhetorical situation, the context that you're writing in, is you, the one doing the writing. Another major aspect you want to keep in mind during writing is your purpose. What are you trying to accomplish? Let's take a closer look. One of the most important things that you need to consider is your purpose. You want to keep in mind what you are trying to do and how you can best do it in back of your mind for all the decisions that you make as a writer, from word choice to organization, selection of information, and amount and type of analysis or discussion. Even if your ultimate purpose is to get an A, your paper has to do something in particular to earn that A. What is the teacher looking for? Therefore, one approach to take is to consider the type of writing you're being asked to do. Are you writing in order to present information? If so, you want to stay objective in your use of language and stay away from emotional language or discussion. You also want to use correct terminology. You want to make sure and focus on your information without adding anything irrelevant. And one of the most important things is that your facts are all correct. Following the appropriate formatting rules is also essential, whether writing a lab report or a research report. However, you might be writing in order to explain relationships, in which case you'll focus on the connections themselves. You want to make sure that you organize your information so that the cause and effect relationship, or compare and contrast relationship, just to name two possibilities, is clear. On the other hand, if your intent is to interpret evidence and come to a conclusion, then you'll want to use much more emotional and subjective language to sway your reader. Your evidence will need to be carefully chosen and include thorough discussion and analysis linking it to your conclusion. Arguing a point means that everything needs to tie back to that point. This is one of the most common types of academic writing. The point here is that you want to keep in mind what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it when making many of the specific decisions about your writing. There's always a reason for writing, and paying attention to what that is will mean that you're more likely to accomplish it. Whether your purpose is to get an A, or to persuade someone, or something else, you should think about what it is you're trying to accomplish so that you can make writing decisions which support that purpose. The more aware you are of your goal, the more likely you are to achieve it. It's also something to be kept in mind when thinking about most of the other aspects, as you can see from the illustration on the next slide. Now that we've discussed two of the aspects that should influence how you approach your writing and the decisions that you make during the writing process, the next aspect of the rhetorical situation is the topic. This is an important aspect that can have a noticeable effect on your writing, particularly on length. There are a couple of things to think about. What you're talking about, your topic, will affect the best way to talk about it, from whether it's something large that will need a lot of discussion to whether it's something serious versus something lighthearted, each of which would do best with a different tone. Some questions you'll want to consider when choosing your topic are, what meets the requirements of the situation? Whether you're reacting to an assignment or have some other need that's impelling you to write, your topic is likely somewhat constrained by elements of the rhetorical situation. You should also consider what you're interested in or knowledgeable about, since either will make your writing much easier and more fun for you to do, and will result in higher quality writing in the finished product. It's also good to keep your audience in mind. What will best accomplish your purpose with your audience? As I mentioned in the book, one important aspect of topic choice is making it broad enough or narrow enough to fit in your purpose and or the assignment guidelines. A paper about transgender rights could be 30 pages long. One about the treatment of transgender students in your school district would only be a few pages. In either case, you could have a shorter or longer paper depending on how much detail you included and how many details and examples. But in general, the narrower the subject, the more focused and shorter the resulting work will be. Picking your topic and argument is obviously an important part of the pre-writing process, but another aspect of the situation you're writing in, which can have a major impact on the success or failure of your writing, is the audience. After all, your writing needs to affect the particular people reading it in order to be successful. In fact, audience can be the most important aspect to consider. After all, you're trying to have a particular effect on a person or group of people, and so you should keep in mind who you're trying to influence so as to go about it in the best way possible. Obviously, writing directed at your grandparents should be different than writing directed at your best friend from childhood, each of which in turn should be different from writing directed at the president of the company where you work or would like to work. The most effective way to write for your audience is to consider how they are different from you. After all, if we don't think about the audience at all, we will write to someone just like ourselves, someone with the same experiences, values, vocabulary, opinions, etc. Therefore, as I mentioned in the textbook, you'll want to focus on ways in which your audience is different than you are. We'll see some examples of this at the end of the discussion. For now, realize that you want to do things such as considering how the audience's knowledge, values, and attitudes might be different from your own, and picking examples that will be familiar to them, and reasons or arguments that they'll find the most compelling. After all, you'd approach the subject of persuading people that the drinking age should be lowered if you were talking to teenagers versus talking to their parents differently. And you would explain photosynthesis differently to first graders than you would to college students. Both knowledge and attitudes can make a large difference in what you say and how you say it. How detailed you are, what you focus on, your choice of vocabulary, your tone, and more should be influenced by your audience. One challenge experienced by many student writers is that they are not sure who the audience actually is beyond the teacher. There are two ways to approach assignments where no audience is specified. One is to pick the audience you're talking to. Usually this is a choice that is suggested by your topic. For instance, I once had a student who wrote a research paper arguing that male dogs kept as pets should be neutered, and she was specifically talking to the macho or squeamish men who owned dogs but wouldn't even consider it that she saw in her veterinary business. Similarly, an essay about the costs of college tuition might be addressed to high school seniors or people just starting out in college, or it might be addressed to legislators. A research topic about alternative treatments for autism might be geared towards parents with autistic children. If you do have a group in mind for your argument or essay, be sure that you make it clear in the introduction by mentioning the group. For example, quote, "It is important that parents whose children have autism know about," end quote. Or, "While you may know in general that it will cost you a lot of money to go to college, it might surprise you to learn just how much." Make sure to avoid announcements, as discussed in Chapter 1. The other option is to address your paper to the general academic community. This is the most common type of audience you'll deal with. The general academic community basically means college-educated adult Americans who know things that are common knowledge, but don't have specialized knowledge in any field, since each group has different specialized knowledge, and you're addressing all of them. There are a few other aspects that might influence your writing decisions as well. One of these is the form that the writing will take. Different forms have different conventions and restrictions that can affect the final form of your writing. There are nearly an infinite number of forms that your writing might take, such as the ones listed below: speech, book, tweet, blog, letter to the editor, text message, academic essay, of which there are various subforms, lab report, and many more. Whatever the format, you'll want to pay special attention to the formatting requirements. For example, you'd write an informal email differently than a formal essay, and you should approach a 3-page essay assignment differently than a 10-page one. And a paper would be formatted differently than a PowerPoint presentation on the same topic. For evidence, just look at the differences between these video lecture PowerPoints and the textbook chapters themselves. The final aspect of the rhetorical situation that can have an influence on your writing is culture. This can be thought of as another part of author and audience, since it is an interplay between your culture and that of your audience, but it is something that underlies all modes of communication. An important aspect to consider is the culture of your readers. An informal, humorous piece that works well on young American adults might well fall flat with young adults from a more formal culture, such as a Hispanic or Asian culture, or even with older adults. Cultural differences can affect other aspects as well. Asian cultures tend to value a writing style that is artful in spiraling around the point via implications, whereas Western cultures tend to value a straightforward and direct type of style. You can see this illustrated in the chart taken from a seminal study in 1977 on patterns of difference in writing styles between cultures. In English and Northern European languages, there's an emphasis on organization and conciseness. Here, a point is made by building up to it through background. An introduction will often foreshadow what is to be said. This style of writing is very inductive and linear, which you can see illustrated by the arrow on the right. In Romance languages, such as Spanish, French, Romanian, or Portuguese, this style is often considered boring and inelegant. Detours are expected and are considered a sign of class, not of poor organization. Development happens through digression and taking lots of time. You begin with a topic, go off on a tangent, contradict the tangent, conclude with the main idea. It is flowery, fancy, formal, and includes a lot of reiteration, and each time saying it bigger, better, and more flowery than before. Sending a message in the English discourse pattern can come across as a rude command, whereas English speakers might want a Romance language speaker to get to the point more quickly. Semitic languages such as Arabic and Hebrew link together at the end but are loose in between. Information is given, and a person may or may not link information to the next concept. You ask a question, and the person responds with a question. In Asian languages, there's often a great deal of circularity. Because of concerns about potential loss of face, opinions may not be expressed directly. Instead, speakers may hint at ideas or indicate what others have said, waiting for feedback from the other speaker before committing to a point of view. Similarly, in many Native American languages, it's considered rude to directly address the main idea or issue. Instead, poetic hints are given, and the reader must figure out the main idea through them. Russian language, on the other hand, was described as being situational and always changing. Sometimes told one way, the next time rearrange it and give a different version of the story. Culture is most significant when the reader and writer, or listener and speaker, come from different cultures, like India versus America, or different subcultures, like Texas versus LA. Just like with the audience aspect, you want to focus on where the audience's cultural experiences or expectations may differ from yours when making choices about what evidence to include, what arguments to make, or how to phrase things. So then, all of these aspects of the situation, the author, your purpose, the topic, the audience, the form, and even culture, influence how successful your writing is. And by being consciously aware of these aspects and thoughtful in the choices you make your writing more successful in whatever you want it to do. The elements of the rhetorical situation shape how you approach the writing and the factors that go into creating it. Let's take a look at the choices made by one successful communicator to see how a particular author responded to the elements of his particular rhetorical situation. It's often easiest to see choices in action when they are different from what you personally would consider the natural way, so we will be examining two examples from a historical source. Since it's easier to see the choices that the writer is making when they don't seem like the natural and obvious choices to you personally, we'll be looking at a historical example that's targeted to very different audience than modern college students. We'll be examining two examples from the historical figure Frederick Douglass to see how he shapes his speech and writing to be the most effective in those particular situations. Frederick Douglass himself lived in the mid-1800s. He was a former slave who taught himself how to read and write and became an African-American figure of rhetorical power and intellectual control. Wikipedia calls him an American abolitionist editor, orator, author, statesman, and reformer. One of his major works was his autobiography, titled Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, and published in 1845. He wrote as an African American for educated white Americans reared on the two major texts of the time, the King James Bible and Shakespeare. We can see him using his audience's familiarity with the Bible and Shakespeare to make his writing resonate in the first example we'll examine. Let's take a look at it now. At one point in his autobiography, he is talking about a time when he was a slave and making plans to run away. He says the following: "The reader can have little idea of the phantoms of trouble which flit in such circumstances before the uneducated mind of the slave. Upon either side we saw grim death assuming a variety of horrid shapes. Now it was starvation, causing us in a strange and friendless land to eat our own flesh. Now we were contending with waves, for our journey was in part by water, and were drowned. Now we were hunted by dogs, and overtaken and torn to pieces by their merciless fangs. We were stung by scorpions, chased by wild beasts, bitten by snakes, and worst of all, after having succeeded in swimming rivers, encountering wild beasts, sleeping in the woods, suffering hunger, cold, heat, and nakedness, we supposed ourselves to be overtaken by hired kidnappers, who, in the name of the law, and for their thrice accursed reward, would perchance fire upon us, kill some, wound others, and capture all. This dark picture, drawn by ignorance and fear, at times greatly shook our determination, and not unfrequently caused us to, rather bear those ills we had, than fly to others which we knew not of." I am not disposed to magnify this circumstance in my experience, and yet I think I shall seem to be so disposed to the reader. No man can tell the intense agony which is felt by the slave when wavering on the point of making his escape. All that he has is at stake, and even that which he has not is at stake also. We can actually see his decisions at work in several ways here. One is that we can see he has an audience in mind with his presentation. For example, none of the horrors mentioned are due to white Northerners. Hired kidnappers are the only human source of agony, and those are people that the Northerners can feel morally superior over, as well as being far removed from anyone they might know or sympathize with. Another way that he works to make his writing persuasive and powerful to his target audience is by using biblical language patterns. While what he is saying is all true, he is using the language of the Bible in several ways. One is that he's using biblical word usage, tone, and texture. For example, the repetition of a starting phrase, now, 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 and the use of the double negative, not unfrequently, are both patterns of language used commonly in the King James Bible. Secondly, his description of the escape of the slaves makes it into a vision of a biblical multitude of tortures and torments. And this image of slavery being hell has two advantages. First, hell was by far the worst thing that most privileged white readers were familiar with and could truly understand or relate to. Secondly, the only ones who go to hell, according to religious leaders at the time, are people, not animals. Humans with souls go to hell, and we are all equal there. A king is punished alongside a beggar. This line of reasoning works against the slaves aren't people line and transfers a feeling of fellowship. Another rather obvious choice made to appeal to his readers is the use of a near direct quote from Shakespeare's Hamlet. Indeed, this quote coming from Hamlet, "To be or not to be" speech, is one of the more famous ones that even the less studious among his readers could be counted on to know. How can the mind of an uneducated slave recall Shakespeare? He's not. This is not a literal transcription of the thoughts of the slave. It is the world of the slave filtered through canonical American literature. Douglas relates his writing to his audience rather than simply recording his thoughts and observations at the time in order to more effectively accomplish his goal of abolition. This example comes from a written book, Douglas's autobiography. Let's take a look at how the expression of his message changes when he's working in a different form and with a different audience. At a speech he was making in Washington, D.C. Civil Rights Mass Meeting in October of 1883, he said, quote, "No man can put the chain about the ankle of his fellow man without at last finding the other end fastened around his own neck." This example also shows a strong consciousness of his audience and his medium. First, since this is a speech, he has a much more concrete, memorable image that will stick with his audience. You can write extended arguments in a book and know that people will be able to read and reread them at their leisure, meaning that a book can be much more complicated and lengthy in how it expresses things. A speech needs to include more memorable and powerful sound bites or one-liners that the audience can easily absorb and that will stick with them after the speech is over. This is a much shorter and more vivid than what was written in the book. He also has a different audience here. Whereas the book was aimed at whites who were more well off, who had their freedom to spend their evenings sitting around reading, his speech is being given to a large gathering of blue-collar workers. These people are less educated, just normal folks. So the language that he's using is much simpler and more direct. On the other hand, just like in the book, his audience is white people, not minorities. I'm sure that in Frederick Douglass's mind, the worst problems with slavery all have to do with consequences to the slave. However, slaves are not the ones he needs to convince. Therefore, this line focuses on the negative consequences of slavery for the white people, like those in the audience, even though personally he would find that argument less than compelling. You want to think not about what you think is the strongest argument or support for your point, but what will convince the audience. Some things that can affect audiences include age, social class, education, past experiences, culture, subculture, upbringing, and expectations. So it's worth taking some time to think about who you're talking to. The more restricted and homogeneous your audience, the more you can tailor your message to be effective. We can also see other aspects at work here. For example, as the author and a former slave, Douglas feels extremely strongly about slavery, and thus his choice of abolition as a topic comes from knowing that as an author, it's something he's passionate and knowledgeable about, and something he can speak with authority about. Obviously, his purpose is influencing his decisions as well, as he tries to make both the book and the speech persuasive arguments for taking a stand against slavery. And of course, the whole thing is tied into America's culture in the late 1800s. Hopefully, these examples show you a little of how the aspects of the rhetorical situation can be kept in mind to help mold effective writing that helps you accomplish your purpose. The bottom line is that you should adapt your writing and speaking depending on the rhetorical situation, especially the audience. Let's take a look at one more contemporary example as a final illustration. For example, here is a letter from a student who wants to buy a car, something he knows his father is not going to approve of initially. "Hi, Dad. I'll get right to the point. I'd like to buy a car. I've saved over $2,500 from working this summer, and I've found 3 different cars that I can get for under $2,000. I can park in Lot C over behind Bailey Field for $75 per semester. That'll leave me over $400 to cover the insurance. And I can earn gas and repair money by upping my hours at the cafeteria. It won't cost you any more, and if I have a car, you won't have to come and pick me up when I want to come home. We can see here how the writer is keeping his audience in mind. He's trying to show his dad that he's responsible, has made a plan, and has researched to find the best deal. He also focuses on the benefits to the father, in that there won't be additional costs to the father, and it'll be an advantage in no longer having to be a chauffeur. Now, while this letter doesn't guarantee the father will be accepting of his son's decision, it is a lot more likely to succeed than a version that doesn't take the audience into consideration. Hi, Dad. I'm buying a car. A guy in my Western Civ course has a cool Chevy he wants to get rid of. I got $2,500 saved from working this summer. It's mine, and I'm going to use it to get some wheels. Mom said you'd blow your top if I did, but I want this car. Michael. While everything in both letters is true, the second one is almost guaranteed to cause a fight. Keep your purpose and your audience in mind when deciding what to say and how to say it. Rhetoric is used both consciously and unconsciously in various ways in order to elicit the exact response you're hoping for from your audience. By keeping the various aspects of the situation in mind, such as your purpose and the audience, you can craft your writing to be much more effective. Now that we've discussed the first step in the writing process, understanding the assignment and the rhetorical situation, we'll move to the next video lecture to discuss how to generate, gather, and organize ideas as we move on to the other steps of the writing